We can't know when or where the next emergency, big or small, will strike, but we can be ready. Hi, I'm Mike Marshall, husband and father of 3 children. I hope that what I'm about ready to share with you will change the way you think about meeting the needs of your community. Also, I hope you can have the peace of mind you have done all you can as a faith leader to help your family and friends and your houses of worship become ready to respond spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically to emergencies both large and small. It wasn't too long ago my community was hit with a microburst storm in Arizona. While most in the community were prepared and some had insurance, there were a few families who didn't have flood insurance at all or the money necessary to restore their home. This created an opportunity for people with a heart to respond, but required a systematic process to respond well. With that same year, my wife was also affected by a debilitating disease called Lyme disease. Many people face these kind of challenges that are big or small, but they don't have a network to turn to for support or assistance. Your community needs houses of worship to work together when a crisis occurs. People are seeking leadership from the faith community. What I want to share with you today is a little bit more about how any house of worship or faith community as a whole can be empowered in a new way to meet the needs of their community. I'd like to play a short video that talks about what Christian Emergency Network is, where it's going, and just a little summary of what it's all about. Then we'll discuss more in detail how it all works together and how you can have a redundant systematic process to work with other houses of worship within your faith communities.
We can't know when or where the next crisis will strike. Or who will call upon the Christian community to respond. But we can be ready.
There's a great heart in the Christian leaders of Tempe, and they really truly desire to serve. But there's been a logistical problem.
The problem in Tempe, like so many other communities, is the church is not biblically ready to respond as one through praying, caring for survivors, and sharing Christ sensitively and effectively.
So for the first time, there's going to be Christian leaders that all come together to hear from the mayor, to hear from the mayor's heart for his passion for people. It's not about politics today, it's about people.
CEN unifies all parts of the church to work together to respond locally. It creates unity, a common focus, and a structure for preparing and responding to crisis.
We need to engage with one another as human beings. We may disagree about policy, but we don't have to be disagreeable. We need to bring back a heart of charity and mercy towards one another.
God is raising His servants, gonna serve community so they can connect their life to the church.
In Tempe, the local government was running out of resources and turned to the faith community to respond to crisis levels of homelessness due to mounting job losses.
I got contact with a young lady out here, and I was sharing my heart concerning homeless people, concerning just doing something for the community.
Allowing churches to see the need of working with the Christian Emergency Network. I think that's the beauty of the relationship that we see between the Palau Association and the Christian Emergency Network.
CEN seamlessly integrates and coordinates the Christian response before, during, and after a crisis, facilitating working agreements between Christian organizations to share resources, bringing Christian leaders together to focus efforts on critical needs, providing biblical readiness training to prepare Christians spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically for crisis response, and maintaining infrastructure for communication and coordination.
If you are compelled by the Great Commandment not only to love God, but to love your neighbor, I think Christian Emergency Network is a critical part.
I've seen so much genuine giving that I don't look at it the same way. I've still got a while to go before personal beliefs are actually, something I've got, but it's not out of the question anymore.
My request to the faith leaders in all of our community are to bring back to their congregations, to their membership, the message that now is the time to re-engage.
When crisis strikes and the invitation comes to bring the goodness of God back into our cities, we need to be ready to respond as one.
The church should be accessible, it should be available, and it should be able to administer the love of God in the time of a crisis. That's when people are needed the most. And if you can't rely on the church, who is representing what we call God, then who can you turn to? And so if the church don't understand how to deal with the crises within themselves, how can they help anybody else?
CEN is uniting all parts of the church, locally, to biblically respond to crisis and disaster. Discover how at ChristianEmergencyNetwork.org.
Our focus today is on the local house of worship itself and how together we can be equipped to handle crisis and emergencies that will happen in our community. You'll notice that in that video we talked a little bit about job loss and financial crisis. You may also think of things like divorce or single mothers or poverty or drug issues. All those things, when they happen to us or in our community, are just as much of an emergency as a natural disaster. Any response to crisis, whether large or small, operates very similarly. The scale of a disaster may be different, but how we handle and respond to those incidents are the same. What I'm about ready to share with you today will not only equip your house of worship to handle the small emergencies, but will prepare you for the big emergencies as well. The vision of the Christian Emergency Network is for every Christian or member of your own faith to be ready to respond biblically to emergencies large or small. However, we have current limitations as well. These limitations are often found in my own church. We have a great number of people and a great leadership, but we still have limitations that keep us from meeting our community need effectively. You've probably seen this bumper sticker before. What happens is we all sometimes get in the same room together when there's an emergency, but we have multiple faith groups. Sometimes we lack focus or ability to get things done because we sometimes have very different spiritual perspectives. Another limitation is simply the way we organize. We have different hierarchies. We have some that are top down, some that are bottom up, some that are a round table. Sometimes you get to be so complicated that it becomes a limitation. Another one is resources. Many times I've asked pastors to give me their budget line item for reaching their communities. Often it's about $2,000 or $3,000, and sometimes there's no budget for outreach at all. Many resources are put into building facilities. Buildings can definitely be used for outreach, but what I've seen is most churches or houses of worship aren't used 24/7. They're open maybe once or twice a week. Some even lack resources and finances to be able to really meet the community need. So how can we overcome these limitations? I just did a quick little Google search, and just to find out the opposite of the word limitation, well, guess what? It's facilitation. Facilitation is broadly used to describe any major activity in which makes tasks for others easy. The reason why I honed in on this keyword is one of the reasons why I'm talking with you today, because I believe as faith leaders, we need to focus on outreach activities, but we also need to focus in on the facilitation of these outreach activities when responding to the community need. I found that when we have people in our congregation that have a heart to respond, they oftentimes don't have necessarily the leadership. They lack facilitation. They bring resources to the table very graciously and very effectively, but the key component is facilitation. Again, it's not a resourcing problem, it's a facilitation problem. Some of you in the room may remember back in the 1960s, there was a problem with fire trucks. When there was a fire in California, they needed assistance from a fire department in Arizona. Then they would cross the border to assist. However, when they went to hook up their hoses, they wouldn't work. That was because they had the wrong or different connections. To fix that, they made adapters, of course. Now, however, there are standards that allows for trucks to cross borders and share those resources more effectively. So this is the principle behind what I want to share. There are a few things that we can do in our houses of worship that will standardize our response so that we can work more effectively together. So that brings us to the Readiness Project. So how does it work? Christian Emergency Network unites Christian volunteers, community leaders, and emergency professionals in equipping the church to be aware, ready, and there to respond to emergencies large and small. Now in the middle of your screen, I have an icon that represents the church or house of worship. I want you to think of your own zip code that you live in. For my zip code, it's 85086. There's approximately 60,000 people in my zip code. Now I also want you to think about the community in need. This could be a tornado. It could be a car accident that happened to a family in a church, or a fire from a church member or someone just down the street. This still could be flooding that's happening because of a hurricane. Whatever it might be, I want you to think about what your community need is in your zip code. We have many people in our houses of worship. See the graphic with the people with the hearts on them? Those represent people in our church. My church has about 300 people, but churches range in size. However, the people all have a heart that want to help people when there is a crisis or a disaster. What we found is that when there is a crisis or disaster, many people tend to just show up. In fact, 90% of those in crisis will ask, "Where is God in this?" So this is a defining moment of leadership for our faith community. Ask yourself, is your house of worship event focused or incident focused? Think about it for a minute. Instead of opening this question up for discussion, events are planned, whereas incidents are unplanned. We found that churches put a lot of effort into planned events to get people to show up for church. We do lots of communications, marketing, graphics works, entertainment weaved into our message, but what we've seen is when an incident occurs, we have no problem getting people to show up. We believe that the church is actually planning for an incident, then they are ready and equipped to actually receive these kinds of volunteers that want to help. We'll be able to train them and equip them to be able to respond and share their faith, especially when your community is in need. So there's a large number of people of faith with a heart to respond, but they're ill-equipped. They have a heart to respond, but they need to be equipped and trained. Now, of course, I'm not the only church. The church on the left and the right represents other churches in my zip code. How do I reach those churches? How do I effectively communicate? How do I effectively access resources that they have that I might not have? Then we also have the media, government, and different organizations such as the Red Cross or the Salvation Army, all great organizations with great amount of resources, but how do I connect with them as a house of worship? The CEN training equips the church to fill in these gaps, filling the gaps between you and the congregations, the gaps between you and other churches, and we fill the gaps between you and these other organizations, making the response result much stronger. What we did is we developed these three trainings: the Ready Christian, Ready Church, and Ready City. Remember, we have a lot of Christians with a heart to respond, but are not trained to do so. Our Ready Christian training walks each person through how to become spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically prepared to respond to emergencies. Next, we have the Ready Church and how a church can become prepared themselves with leaders forming a common leadership structure that can not only be developed in their own church, but can be shared with other churches as well. Then the Ready City is where 2 or 3 more churches come together and say, hey, we can work together. We want to assess our resources and capacity as a group, since we recognize we can't take care of our community need all on our own or as individual churches. The trainings may be also called Ready Mosque or Ready Synagogue, but the basic training is the same so that they can all function together using common standards. So what is a Ready Christian? First, it is acknowledging that we are Christians, or in your case, it may be acknowledging that you are Jewish or Muslim. We do this through a statement of faith or a written document of who we are and what we believe in, which I'll go into more a little later. Second, we become familiar with what we call an emergency management incident command system. I'll go into that more detail later as well. But each person would be familiar with how a command structure works when an incident happens. Even in their own family, leadership structures are important, just as actively training holistically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, and physically is important to in any response. People who are prepared to respond when disasters occur recover more quickly. A ready church is again using the same statement of faith, followed by setting up a leadership structure that works along with national, state, or local incident command structure. It's modeled after the incident command structure that your local law and fire responders use every day. We'll show you how to adopt that same leadership structure into your house of worship for your response. The next step for any ready house of worship is declaring your community need, which is why we are gathered together to discuss today for your city. Think about when you pick up the phone and call 911. The dispatcher answers and asks you, "What is the nature of your emergency?" The question brings focus and intention to what is needed at that moment. By declaring your community need, it will bring focus to your own house of worship and those around you as well. So the Ready City, all we do here is add the word unified. The unified statement of faith is still the same statement of faith, but we use it in a broader citywide context. When houses of worship come together, we call this unified incident command system. And we'll show you what that looks like and how that works. This is why you have come together today, to form an all-faith unified incident command system. Think about a citywide declared emergency with a focus in your zip code. So what do you believe would be the greatest community need right now? So let's break this down with the statement of faith. CEN uses the Lausanne Covenant, which was established several years ago by Dr. Billy Graham and others who saw a need for a clear statement of what it means to be a Christian. I would encourage you, following this webinar with your computer, go online to Christian Emergency Network site, click on the About section to the Lausanne Statement of Faith and read it. There's also a short video that gives an overview of what the Statement of Faith is all about. You'll want to create your own Statement of Faith for Jewish and Muslim faiths to clearly define who you are and what you believe. This step will help others within our faith to better understand your faith traditions and therefore build stronger relationships, which will be tested during joint emergency responses. Having a Christian, Muslim, or a Jewish statement of faith can help us resolve misunderstandings and miscommunications, which can easily happen in any crisis. CEN, as well as your faith groups, needs a leadership structure. We saw the wisdom of using a modified faith-based structure, which is the same leadership structure which has been widely tested in crisis used in incident command. You should have a copy in your packet. Again, this is the same leadership structure that your local fire and law enforcement already use. The beauty of using the same structure is that when you start responding to emergencies, whether small or large, you will already know how your local fire and law enforcement are structured to respond for when you need to assess their resources. It is kind of like using the same language while in a foreign country. First responders know this structure very well, and now you'll have also a greater knowledge of what your role is in the house of worship within the total response structure. As an example, in one of our CEN's partner location, there was a microburst storm that hit the community and took out 3 homes. Well, fire showed up and took command of the incident. Knowing this structure, the CEN person that responded knew the questions to ask and the person to ask to let them know CEN was there to assist as needed. It is in this instance fire was finishing the response when CEN person arrived. The result was one of the families lost everything in the flood and found out they were not covered by flood insurance. In this case, there was about $50,000 to $60,000 loss and damage, and the people affected had no way to pay for it. So using an already established incident command structure, you'll be able to respond as a team. Instead of one person being responsible for everything, the team of 9 different roles were able to work together to respond. CEN has an added ministry aspect to the incident command structure to ensure the ministry aspect is focused upon in any response. The prayer officer, care officer, and share officer roles are added in this traditional ICS role. These 3 roles are critical to meeting the holistic faith needs of the community. When you commit to becoming a ready city, we'll show each of your leaders how to effectively do their job in the areas of these 9 roles. Many of them are already equipped and have the heart. They just need a little bit more information to know how to do this. In this case of the flood, we brought all the roles into one room, discussed how they could respond, then come up with a mitigation plan for ongoing response plan to help their families that were affected by the flood. One of the unique things that we found is that they first felt limited response, but when they were facilitated, going back to the keyword using earlier, they found that resources and money was not a problem, but it was a lack of trained leadership. In your zip code or my zip code, there is a community need. Oftentimes we have a very subjective view of what the community need is, but when you bring several houses of worship together and bring subject experts to the table, you'll find you'll be able to bring focus to the group. This also strengthens accountability and a network in which you can develop and implement a response plan. We are stronger together than we are separately. So here's a final snapshot of what it looks like. If you have some time, we encourage you to go online and you'll be able to download this PDF document so that you'll be able to share this with other faith leaders. Again, you have individuals with a heart to respond now with training. Your house of worship ready by setting up a leadership ICS structure, committing to a statement of faith, and identifying a community need, but not only within your house of worship alone, but other faith groups as well within your zip code. You are all speaking the same language of defining your faith tenets, same leadership structure, and an agreement on your community need. Normally, if I were there with you doing this in person, I'd have you gather around in different tables, for instance, like round tables. But if you could visualize this for me, maybe you have about 30 people in the room. Could you quickly identify which each one's gifts or talents are? Maybe, maybe not. But if you're a pastor or you're familiar with your church, you could probably be able to identify which people would be suited for each role very quickly. Once each incident command role is identified, we could ask each role to meet with their counterparts at a table. For each church represented, you would see people being able to plan and network within their own role and how they could meet their community need. As I understand it, you'll be doing this in your group this next month. Today, you'll be asked to sign your own faith statement. Next month, you'll learn more about your roles and responsibilities to develop a joint common leadership structure. And today, you'll start assessing your community need. I want to thank you for the opportunity to cast this Ready to Respond Together vision. I'd like to take questions, especially in terms of where you are in your commitment process for becoming ready to respond together.